Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we have a shorter video looking at my recent performance at Borderbash 2025, a big tournament down here in Australia, where I took ISS and had a bit of fun. So let's take a look at Borderbash. So Borderbash 2025 is a really cool satellite event down here in Australia. It's sort of a good meeting point for a lot of people from different states. I've heard really great things about it last year, so I was very excited to go down this year, and it was really fantastic. So, let's take a look at the mission lineup. Cryogenics, Mind Wipe, Countermeasures, Panic Room, and Armory. Looking at this mission lineup, there's a pretty clear divide between Day 1 and Day 2, and we had a lot of fun on Day 2 with Panic Room and Armory, being Armory missions, which really changes list building, really changes how the table gets set up, and sets up a very different game of Infinity. Looking at the first three missions, Cryogenics, Mind Wipe, and Countermeasures, all three of those missions want very specific things to happen. It's not like Firefight or Supremacy or Acquisition, where you can still play a very sort of normal game of Infinity into these missions, except maybe Cryo, you can sort of take that in a more normal direction. They really want you to set specific goals for your lists, and put very specific tools in those lists. Countermeasures, it's very similar to Highly Classified, though a bit less punishing if you decide not to bring a tool in a list, but you're still highly incentivized to bring things like a hacker, an engineer, a doctor, things that can get those classifieds done, because the difference between getting one classified or not can have a big impact on the game. So you're wanting a list that can bring all those tools for highly classified / countermeasures. And then Mind Wipe as well is also looking for very specific tools. Mind Wipe, you're needing something that can blow up those enemy consoles in the deployment zone, whether that's parachutists or drop troops with D charges, or whether that's something like a Datarazi that can run up and just smack it. You are needing very specific tools that some factions get very easily. Some factions don't get very easily, but you need to make sure you pack them. Cryogenics, really cool mission from a previous ITS season. A lot of people regard it as one of the best ITS missions of all time, and I'm inclined to agree. It's a really fun mission, really great mission, and it was a lot of fun to see it back and get to play it again, where it can sort of leave the zeitgeist of the game, but it was really great to get it back. And Cryogenics is, again, pushing you towards taking specific specialists, because you really don't want to mess up those button presses. So, all around looking at these 5 missions, there's a lot of stretch on your list equity. There's a couple different ways to do this. You can either split your lists based off of the Panic Room and Armory difference in what can get in the room. Armory only lets S2s and below inside the room, where Panic Room allows for any size base to get in that room. If your faction is really dependent on that base size, you can do a mission split based on those base sizes. Or, the other way to do it is to split it into the room missions and the non-room missions, where the tools those want are very different. So, I decided to do that. I did a list for Day 1, being Cryo, Mind Wipe, and Countermeasures, and did a separate list for Day 2, being Panic Room and Armory. My reasoning for this was that Panic Room and Armory, they want the same thing, and they've got a same table setup. If I'm going into these missions, I can expect a similar style of table. I can rely on what tools I can put in that, keeping in mind, the Armory, it's in the middle of the table, it's 8x8, it's infinite height. You sort of know your abilities there in terms of getting some more medium-ranged guns, focusing more on those range bands, focusing really heavily on close assault, which left Day 1 mostly centered around countermeasures, where I'm trying to bring a spread of specialists that can help me in countermeasures, that can help me in cryogenics, that can help me press a console in Mind Wipe. So, without further ado, let's take a look at some of the lists. So this is my list 1, as I said, for Day 1, being Cryo, Mind Wipe, and Countermeasures. First up here we have a pure duo of a Crane Rank Lieutenant with AP Spitfire, Pulsar +1 burst, and multi-pistol. Now, the vanilla Crane Agent is in a bit of a weird spot, especially the AP Spitfire, where he's very comparable to Adil. Now, Adil is a character Crane rank, whose main differences to the base Crane Agent are that he has a Disco Baller and BS Continuous. So he's a much deadlier shooter, and he's also much more of a toolbox, where he has that Disco Baller that can facilitate a lot of movement. Now, where the vanilla Crane Agent AP Spitfire sort of is able to win out against Adil is in some very specific situations. The first one is when you really feel the need for SWIC saving. You can see that the AP Spitfire Lieutenant costs 0 SWIC, where Adil costs that 1.5 SWIC. And though it's not something I needed necessarily in this list, that SWIC saving, it was nice to have a bit of wiggle room in that respect. But the real reason the base Crane Agent is here over Adil is because of Mind Wipe. Now, Adil, as good as he is, he's got a very funky close combat setup, where he has a Para-Neg-6 CC weapon and a Monofilament CC weapon. Both very good CC weapons, but neither that can damage the server in Mind Wipe. So that's the main reason I've taken this vanilla Crane Agent, is for that DACC weapon. Anti-Material can take a swing at the console in Mind Wipe and do some damage. Then we've got that Crane Agent in a pure duo with a Zan Ying Hacker with 0 pain, pictures, and D-charges. The Zan Ying, it's a real machine in terms of classifieds. It's medium infantry, it's veteran or elite, it's got D-charges, it's a hacker. So by itself, it can already do a large swath of the classified deck, along with being a pure duo for the Crane Agent. So you're looking at 5 dice on the AP Spitfire, which, on a model that's only BS13 with no mods, is really nice. I was able to win a lot of not so great or not favored rolls, just by weight of dice and having a bit of resilience. And the Zan Ying Hacker being stapled to the Crane Agent really enabled that. As well, the picture, it's the only picture in the faction. It's a new picture to the faction. And it's very hard to make a list without the Zan Ying, where you get to bring that picture, which is really nice for extending your network, scalping out opponents' hackers, where you are taking a lot of hackable units, and altogether being a bit of a pain for your opponent. So that's a duo. Next up, we've got a core of the FTO missile launcher, the Celestial Guard Monitor, and 2 Guangxi. You need the Monitor and the 2 Guangxi to form the Guangxi core, and then as a wild card, the missile launcher can slot into that really nicely. You've kind of got 2 directions to go with your Guangxi. You can either have them as deployment zone defense, getting those bonus dice to your Celestial Guard Monitor for smoke grenade launching, or you can have them as kind of running up, slowly invading a midfield. And in this list, I opted to keep them more as that deployment zone defense, where they could give that bonus to the Celestial Guard Monitor, and also to the Missile Launcher FTO. The Missile Launcher FTO is a pretty interesting piece. If I was to fit another Guangxi in here, I could get it up to BS13 with a 4-man link bonus. But it's a very interesting aero piece. You usually chuck it far back how you would a Thunderbolt TR bot, and getting a face-to-face roll on the missile bot is more of the challenge than actually taking it down. Your opponent needs to maneuver to get to a position where they can safely engage the missile bot, and that tends to take a decent amount of time. And hey, sometimes they take the fight and they fail. Additionally, we've got an Evo hacker further down in the list, and I've found on active turn a marksmanship missile bot throwing 2.5 dice on 15 is usually enough to get a job done if it's been counter-deployed or has a very clear target. So, turn 1, it's a great little piece both for offense and defense. It can be picked up later in the game if the Sheji engineer is in the right position, or even a speedball is good to get it up as well. Next up was a very late inclusion to the list, the Koga Ninja Killer Hacker. I was finding in my games, in a previous iteration of the list, my opponent was able to get to the midfield and to objectives a bit too easily. So I decided to give the Koga Hacker a shot. The objectives in the first day of missions, where cryogenics is kind of a bit further back than the center line, and the two consoles and Mind Wipe are almost at the center line, meaning the Koga has a pretty good position. Mind Wipe also has a hacker bonus, so in the event that my opponent pressed up a regular hacker to press one of those buttons, the Koga Ninja could take advantage. And as well, the decoy came in very handy. The Koga Ninja being a new piece to the game means that people don't necessarily know that that decoy is a decoy, and that decoy gave my opponents a lot of pause when looking to come around a corner where I would position it to make it look like a mine and not like a decoy. The Koga Ninja also being a surprise attack killer hacker through the Zhanying's picture, got a couple of really great fries there, but it is expensive. It's quite an expensive piece at 30 points. It does give you a lot of tools. The EM Carbine only being non-lethal, though, does present some challenges, which we'll get to a bit later. But altogether, I'm very happy I ended up taking this guy. He did quite a lot of work defensively and offensively in the list. Next up, the Thunderbolt TR-Bot. Just a very easy ARO piece. Put it up, chuck it back. It's also with that Evo Hacker, where it can get marksmanship for a little bit of offensive shooting if it has to, or to just really harden that ARO presence. Then we flick over to Group 2, and we've got a Haris team of the CN Heavy Machine Gun Nanopulsar +1 Burst, and he's also got DACC weapons, so a viable run on the console. But he's the real active turn meat mincer, BS-14 Heavy Machine Gun with MSV2 in a list that has a lot of access to very efficient smoke. I found to be really powerful. Next up is the Sheji Engineer, who has that keyword for the CN and gives that link its bonus. It's nice as an engineer both to reconstitute the remotes in the list and to get those classifieds done. So even though it is a bit expensive for what it is, just as a very normal engineer with a couple of boutique upgrades that you never really end up using, it's got a really nice place in the list. And finally, to round that out, we've got the Pheasant Mine Layer, who I found really interesting over practice and over my games. The Mad Trap, it's a very impactful kind of mine. No matter what it hits, it's going to be significant. Unlike a Crazy Koala, where even if it hits and does a wound to a heavy infantry or a tag, they might not necessarily care. The Mad Trap's always going to hit whatever it hits very hard and stop that attack run right there. Pheasants, they've all got Chain of Command, which is why I can feel safe running up that Crane Agent. And they've also all got Strategic Deployment. So this means a few things. The first thing is, it means the Mad Trap can actually go up to 16 inches. So a bit of forward deploying mine layer, really valuable. And then also it lets that whole link press up a bit further. This is pretty nice if you're going first, where you can chuck them further up the field to save yourself some maneuvering. It was really nice in cryogenics, where I was able to start my CN, who I picked as my Master Breacher, outside of my deployment zone, which meant even if they didn't activate or I didn't use or move the CN, I was able to pick up that point for Master Breacher. And then getting that whole link up defensively as well just means you free up a bit of space in your deployment zone. Sometimes you can get sort of stuck where you need to put multiple models kind of in the same spot, or you end up in a table where the deployment zone isn't as safe as you'd like it to be. Having that strategic deployment gives you a lot of flexibility, and chucking that in a Haris team, 3 models out of your DZ, makes a big difference. Then, rounding that out, we've got a second Haris team, which is a nice little perk of playing ISS, where we have a Celestial Guard Hacker, a Celestial Guard Smoke Grenade Launcher, and a Dragon Lord. Now, the Dragon Lord is there kind of as a very close ARO piece, kind of how you'd use a war core, and it getting burst 2 actually meant it got a few flashes off, but it is mostly just there to make that Celestial Guard team viable, as they need to be a Haris team, they can't be a duo. The Smoke Grenade Launcher, again, a really great unit. I like having smoke available by using both groups, so if Group 1 needs smoke support, the smoke in Group 2 can facilitate that to make sure Group 1 has the orders it needs to succeed, and vice versa. The Celestial Guard Hacker, it's just a Whip 14 hacker with BTS 3 for 14 points, is really outstanding, and we've got a good amount of repeater presence here, with pictures, with the deployable repeater from the Koga Ninja, and even with some of the remotes if the opponent pushes into the DZ. Having that backup hacker in your network to give your opponent pause is really important, and again, it's a nice little classified machine. Having that ability to do those hacking classifieds from Group 2 is really important. So, this list is really bringing this large toolbox to focus on countermeasures, and it's very efficient, where most of the units in the list are linked. It's got a very sustainable defensive mix, where you have your active ARO pieces in the missile launcher, in the Thunderbolt, who can be picked up, who can be evoed, who can sustain and take that long game. And you've also got the Koga Ninja decoy, giving your opponents pause, and the Pheasant Mine Layer as your last line of defense before things get hairy. Same with the Dragon Lord there as well. You get to cheat a bit of Swick with the Crane, so you get to bring more to your list than you otherwise would. But it is worth pointing out, ISS is a bit particular, where your smoke is costing you Swick. So, in a way, it's very good. It's very good smoke. It's very efficient smoke, but it is costing you Swick. So the Crane kind of counteracting that is very handy as well. The big downside is that you've only got one real maneuverable long-range gunfighter, and that's the CN. Sure, you can evo the Thunderbolt, but that's 3 dice, best on 14s, PS6. That's not great. And then the missile launcher, it's a very good gun piece, but it doesn't want to leave the deployment zone. It wants to stay as part of that defensive mix. So if you need to go out and get something done, then the CN's the only real piece in the list that can do that. This is part of the pressure that these missions have put on this list, where I need a lot of tools, so I couldn't necessarily focus on bringing a lot of guns. Older iterations of this list were taking things like Deva Dakini duos to shore up that weakness, but I was finding them just not resilient enough, finding that Evo bonus stretched a bit too thin. So we switched to the CN. I'm very glad we did. He performed really fantastically over all 5 games. Well, sorry, over the 3 games he was in. Alright, list 2 is for Panic Room and Armory, and you can see here a Dill Crane rank being taken over the base Crane Agent, where he's got that AP Spitfire, Nanopulsar, and Disco Baller is really valuable, and he's got that BS Attack Continuous Damage. He's got number 2 as well, which is important for Panic Room, and lets you enable some really funny things with the Quang Shi, and he's stapled to the Celestial Guard Monitor and 3 Quang Shi, making it a pure 4-man team, putting a Dill up to BS14, which feels really dangerous. So the plan for this team is to either rush the objective room, if going second, clear it out with Quang Shi and a Dill, and then be able to sit there. Or, if we're made to go first into either Armory or Panic Room, just to run that core into the opponent's deployment zone, do as much damage as we can, leave them there, and say deal with it. Now, again, we've taken the Thunderbolt +1 burst and the Pangolin Evo hacker, but we've also taken the Rushi MSV-1 with Red Fury and Mind Dispenser. Now, while it's not able to get inside the room in Armory, it's very rarely going in the room itself. What it's doing is it's using the Mind Dispenser to set up really nasty forks if we're going second and need to clear out a room, or setting up a really solid defense where it's going to be a pain for the opponent to get to the room if they're going second. The MSV1 as well is also really valuable. ISS is a faction where it can be hard to get a positive face-to-face roll against a good ARO piece without jumping through a few hoops. And one thing that makes that hard is that mimetism can pose a real challenge when most of your gun pieces are just BS13 with no mods, with the main exception being the Cien and the Long Wang, who are costing you upwards of 50 points. So the Rushi is sort of a budget Cien in this regard, where it's bringing a bit of that defensive tech with the Mine Dispenser, but also a marksman MSV1 Red Fury is able to get something done. Then, this list is very intensive in terms of points, so I've just taken a free-range Guangxi to round out that group. Group 2, first up is Sun Tzu. So Sun Tzu, really interesting piece. It's bringing counter-intel, it's bringing Strategos level 2, Lieutenant +1 order, and is actually a very good gun piece in an armory. He's BS12 with Mimneg 3, Immune Enhanced, Vulcan Shotgun, and 2 wounds, no wound in camp, which means he's a very tough cookie who can also wipe out the room by himself. He's also my stealth ops in these missions, which means he can get some really nasty angles heading into that room, and being my lieutenant means he counts as essential personnel for the purpose of Panic Room. So Sun Tzu brings a few things. The first thing, he's got Lieutenant +1 order and Strategos, so whatever group he's in is getting an additional 3 orders, and Strategos level 2 means that I get to move 1 unit for free each turn. So, if we're going first, and we're made to go first, ideally we go second in armory missions. Sun Tzu can put himself into group 1. We're getting the Evo bonus from the missions, so we're setting a 10 order group up to a 13 order group with counterintelligence. That means the worst our opponent can do to us is reduce our order pool in group 1 to 12 orders, and I was able to have some very good games where Adil and the Guangxi were able to rush the enemy deployment zone with those 12 orders and do some real damage. And then after that turn, it's likely most of that core is dead, but your opponent is nowhere useful. Then Sun Tzu can just put himself back into group 2, maybe use a command token to move the Evo Hacker into group 2, depending on how catastrophic the losses are in group 1. And suddenly, your group 2's got a very healthy order count. Or if you're going second, Sun Tzu buffing up that order pool in group 2 is really nice. So really, when you look at this list, it's 14 regulars, 1 irregular. It's actually got +3 regulars. From 2 from Sun Tzu, then 1 from the Evo Hacker, because of the Evo Hacker bonus in the missions. So you're looking at a 17 regular, 1 irregular group list, which is able to get quite a lot done. Next up, we've got the Crane Agent Triangulated Fire Sensor Multi-Rifle, duoed with the Zhanying. We've explained the Zhanying's role earlier, but the Crane Agent Triangulated Fire Sensor, it's a very interesting piece that I think has some really cool application. The first and very obvious one is Sensor. In some Panic Room missions, depending on the matchup, your opponent's plan might just be to camo and walk into the room. Having a sensor there that can sweep the whole room, reveal everything, really valuable. Same with, a lot of mine dispensing, a lot of tricks like that. The second one is Triangulated Fire. As I said before with the Rushi, where you can sometimes struggle with Mim arrows, the Rushi can struggle with Mim 6 arrows sometimes. So having the Crane Agent who's there who can always Triangulated Fire, always get a fair fight, is actually quite valuable. Being in that link puts you up to burst 4 with the multi-rifle, but at the end of the day, it is just a multi-rifle. PS7 can let you down, even if it is AP. Your opponent's always got, at a baseline, if they're in cover, a 50-50 chance to pass, and it only gets better for your opponent from there. Next up, the Pure Dakini duo with the multi-sniper Dakini, who's BS11, Mimneg 3, another really good target for the Evo Hacker, in a pure duo with the Deva Killer Hacker Boarding Shotgun, who's an absolute gun, no wounding cap killer hackers, as I discussed in my tournament video with White Banner, are really, really powerful. If you land a repeater, kind of looking at a hacker, a regular hacker, and a killer hacker, you're happy to just face check that incoming trinity from the killer hacker, because you can afford to take that wound and just dump everything into the regular hacker. In this case, the Deva also has immunity isolation, which can be really handy. And look, a boarding shotgun, it's got number 2, so it's an essential personnel for panic room. It can cyber mask and walk into the room. It's got a lot of really good uses into those armory missions. Then, just a war core to round us out, get us that extra half order, get us that little ARO piece, nothing bad at all. So this is a very aggressive list, focused on taking and holding ground with the core, and we've got a very high amount of order generation. We stay very flexible with Sun Tzu's Strategos, moving him around, putting those orders where we need them, and a 3-order swing, it's huge. It's like using 3 command tokens a turn. It's massive, and we've got a huge amount of templates. Every Guangxi here has a chain rifle. A lot of our units also have, mine dispensers or boarding pistols, and when the Guangxi die, they explode as well. So it's a very dangerous list to engage in close quarters. The main weakness of the list is that Sun Tzu costs quite a lot, and true close assault, which is, martial arts, it's all tied up in our very expensive units, which can expose them to a lot of risk. Alright, while my wins were fun and cool, I think my losses were a lot more interesting than my wins. So, I've got 2 losses here, and if you've watched my video on losing, which you definitely should, because we're going to be using some of the language from that video, this is a really cool case study on losing. So, first, in our round 2, we had Mind Wipe, where we had a systematic failure in list building. So if you've watched my losses video, you know that there's 2 main groups of failures, a flashpoint failure and a systematic failure, and Mind Wipe was very much a systematic failure. What happened was, I had taken a lot of tools in my list, and I had taken them mostly towards countermeasures, and I hadn't put enough of my list equity into Mind Wipe. So, when it came to looking at what can blow up the console, I had to cross the whole table with some of my heavy infantry to try and get pips on that console. In previous iterations of the list, I'd taken a parachutist decharges, which I really should have kept in there, and this was a big failure on behalf of the list. Now, a failure on behalf of the list is a failure on behalf of me. I didn't build it right, but then past that, we've got some more factors that I think make a really interesting case study. So in the white here, we have things that happened because of my mistakes, and then kind of in the red there, we have struggles I had partially influenced by ISS that can give us a bit of insight into what ISS does good and bad. So, in this game of Mind Wipe, I horribly mispositioned my CN, which was my only good long-ranged gun piece. And this was against a Moratz player, a very good Moratz player, Nick Owen from the Loss of Lieutenant podcast. Great podcast, make sure to go check them out if you haven't already. Where Nick was really able to exploit my bad positioning. I wasn't able to get things done. And when that CN went down, the rest of my list collapsed by not having that long-range maneuverable problem solver. And that led to me stranding my assault units in the midfield, where I was just trying to get any amount of movement up the field, where actually it would have been better to just focus more on a defense at that point, and maybe keep the long game in mind in terms of getting some wounds on a console. Mind Wipe's interesting, where as long as you can, say, both press a button, as long as you can get some wounds or blow up a console, not necessarily the right console, you can come out of that game ahead. But I tunnel visioned really hard on trying to get the console with my opponent's AI in it, which caused me to have a very short-term view of the game, which led to a lot of very bad mispositioning that my opponent was able to exploit very well. So let's talk a bit about the factors from the faction side of things that made my game a bit difficult. So, first up, we were pinned in by MSV. Nick had brought a Yaogat, who isn't usually an ARO piece, usually more of an active turn piece, but Nick identified very quickly that the only vision control I had in my list were these smoke grenade launchers, who the Yaogat doesn't care about as an MSV2 piece, and the only long-ranged gun I had was the Cien, where Nick positioned his Yaogat on the opposite side of the table. Now, the smoke grenade launchers are really, really good at covering vision control and doing that sort of thing, but they absolutely fold under a multispectral visor, and Nick realized that, and he played it really well. So I didn't have any disco balls in the list. ISS doesn't have any heavy albedo. It doesn't have any white noise. So my only recourse was to go around it or try to take it out with something. My Cien couldn't do that. I didn't really have the time or the right order split to go around it. And I was able to get pinned pretty heavily by that MSV. And I think that's something to be aware of as an ISS player, where unless you're taking two very specific units with disco balls who aren't always foods, you can get very hemmed in by MSV pieces. So that's something to be very aware of as an ISS player. They've also got a lack of anti-material CC. Really, you've only got the Cien and the Crane Agent in terms of anti-material CC, which comes into play in missions like Mind Wipe and also looting and sabotage. Your decharge units don't really want to be up the field, aside from some decharging parachutists. So it was sort of something very noticeable in the old ISS, where you lacked anti-material elements for those missions. And even though they've been updated, it is still something that's present, that your anti-material CC, it's not as easy as having something like a Dadarazi or a Varangian. You need to bring very specific tools that usually are costing you in the range of 30 plus points to try and destroy those consoles. Then non-lethal is very matchup dependent. We were taking emitters, we were taking some glue traps, that sort of thing. But Nick being Morats, with all having Warhorse, really didn't care about my non-lethal arrows in a way that an army usually would. And it leads into our second point, which is a lack of ranged AP. So, being that his heavy infantry, like his Kaitok, were immune to being emitted, where they would only get carbonized, a lack of ranged AP meant they were actually very hard to punch through and chew through. So, having that lack of ranged AP means you need to have ways to really crack heavier armor units that do have Warhorse. And maybe this is, leading more into things like Crane Agents, where I probably could have positioned that better. There are a number of things I could have done to make this game have a better outcome for me. But it was very interesting to see how different factors from the faction really kind of come to light when you already find yourself in a difficult position. So these are some things to keep in mind making ISS lists and running ISS lists where you're pretty weak to MSV. Your tools for anti-material are somewhat limited, and the non-lethal and lack of ranged AP can get you in some tough spots. And next up, round 4 for Panic Room, we took our second loss over the weekend, which was really interesting compared to my round 2 loss, because this was a flashpoint failure. This was a decision or series of decisions I made that had catastrophic consequences for my game. Now, up to this point in the game, I was advantaged, and was still probably advantaged a couple steps into these mistakes, but after that, things really fell apart for me. So, my first big mistake is I misjudged a template range on an angle I didn't have to take, which ended in getting Sun Tzu killed, and my Crane Agent taking a wound. I thought I was outside of a range. I wasn't, and I didn't actually have to put myself in that position either. I could have taken a different corner to make it so that the worst case outcome for my action would have been a lot less. This is a pretty simple mistake to make, but one that can have a pretty big impact, and one that's, even if you think you're outside of a range, always take the safer option just in case. So after this happened, I panicked because of this adverse outcome, and sort of went, oh shit, what do I do now? So prior to starting the turn, I had a game plan in my head. I needed to get my crane agent to kill this Mutwala with chain rifle, and then I needed to kill this frenzied Asawira. So I'd completed step 1 of my plan. I'd had an adverse outcome, but I was still up. But then because of that failure, I panicked and didn't stick to my plan. I didn't kill that Asawira because I was scared of losing the crane agent, which ultimately cost me the game. So I think this is more an interesting spot to look at in terms of play patterns and understanding how you play the game. I think having this panic moment, it's okay to panic, it's okay to have that initial reaction of, oh no, but then it's how you let that panic affect you, and I think I let it affect me in a pretty averse way, where I should have stayed the course and trusted the plan. Then, after progressing through that stage, I didn't account for the scenario in Panic Room, where I forgot about some of my backline who got wiped out, and ultimately meant my opponent had more points, scoring 3 points for the scenario off of that. So, what this really reflects on is, in the white here, this flashpoint failure. It's very good and bad. It's good because it's something that you can immediately recognize happened, and you can immediately recognize the cause of, and you can reflect on quite quickly and easily. In this case, I took a risk I didn't need to take. I had an option of doing something in a medium way and a safe way. I should have just done the safe way. But then the most interesting thing here is recognizing that I panicked, and because of that panic, I abandoned my plan. So I think in my future games, when a bad thing happens, I'm really going to try to recognize, okay, this has happened, but what's the plan, and can I still stick to that plan? No matter what my emotions are telling me, can I stick to that plan? And I think that's a very interesting point of reflection. So what does ISS have to say about this failure? Well, it's that my close assault is relegated to high-cost units, which means a lot of times I'm exposing my high-cost units to a lot of risk in order to get the outcome. Again, you don't have Dadarazi or Varangian. This sort of links with a lack of anti-material CC, but if I'm running in this room trying to hack things up, or if I'm using kind of main assault units, they're all going to be very high cost, and all going to be exposing themselves to quite a lot of risk. So let's brush very briefly over my wins, because I don't think they're as interesting as my losses. The wins from the perspective of the faction. I was able to leverage a lot of movement efficiency with duos and dodge bonuses. I've always sort of scoffed at the Yu Jing, dodge plus 1 inches on kind of all of their infantry everywhere, no matter if they're Fizz 10 or whatever. But I really saw that have a big impact on my games over that long-term 5-game setup, where that extra inch was able to get me behind a piece of cover prone, where I would have otherwise not been able to, or got me a little bit further up the board. And having those 2 Haris teams and a core meant you could drag quite a lot around. I was able to always maintain very annoying arrows in my games. That's using the remotes with Evo hacking with an engineer, but that's also just putting Guangxi very far up the board, where in a 4-man team like that, they're dodging on 15s, which can be a lot more order intensive than your opponent can initially realize. And again, they all explode. They've all got chain rifles. So dealing with them if they're tucked in a corner somewhere, it's no easy feat. And then I made use of the deep toolbox I could bring to the table, whether that was smoke shooting, emitter, setting up forks with the mad trap, running in with a crane agent, setting up pictures with the Zan Ying at an appropriate time. There was a deep toolbox I could bring and I could leverage to make a diverse set of challenges for my opponent to overcome. And, let's say you put a big challenge in front of your opponent, like a Griffin Feuerbach, but that's about it. Sure, you've got a big challenge and your opponent has to put in a lot of effort to solve that. But if you can put lots of little challenges in front of them, that's kind of a bigger mental load and potentially more points of failure. So I enjoyed being able to do that by reaching into that toolbox, bringing out different ways to interact with my opponent. A lot of fun. I use smoke grenade launchers to very high impact. Being 2 dice on 11s with the smoke grenade launcher, or sometimes 12s, is quite reliable. It's about 78% of the time you're getting that smoke down. And compared to a normal warband, you're saving quite a lot of orders doing it. Being able to sling that smoke up to 24 inches, you're saving, let's say you're at least saving 1 or 2 orders per getting the smoke where you want it to be, which gives you a lot of efficiency, even though it is costing you swick. But I think linked smoke grenade launchers this edition, obviously very powerful, and I got to see that really well on the table. I got to utilize the unique opportunities provided by the LT. This is very obvious in Sun Tzu, where I was constantly moving pieces around, constantly getting those orders where I needed them. And then with the crane as well, taking some pressure off this building, and also being able to use that LT order to go very deep. And finally, I was able to stay persistent and flexible over the game, and I think that's something that ISS really excels at, where they've got ways to kind of keep the ball rolling with your multiple link teams, with okay to decent reconstitution, but what they really are is very flexible. They can attack problems in a number of different ways, reaching into that toolbox, which can mean you have a lot of different ways to solve problems than you otherwise would in other sectorials. So, reflecting, let's look at some strengths and weaknesses of ISS. The strengths were the linked special equipment, whether this is strategic deployment and the mad traps, the smoke grenade launchers, the sensors, the triangulated fire, having that specialized equipment, but having it be able to be linked, I found to be a real strength over the weekend. Got really amazing and fun LT options with Sun Tzu, with the crane agent, and there's other LTs in there like the Cien that provide unique opportunities as well. And not just being strong, being very fun to use and fun to play and fun to build with. Real strength of ISS. You've got really efficient duos, mainly focusing on the Xian duos and Haris teams. Having those efficient duos means you're moving that toolbox around and able to solve things in multiple different ways. 2 Haris teams is also a big blessing, where you've got quite good bonuses for a pure Haris team. If you're looking at the Xian Fire team, that +3 to discover can overlap with sensors or with bow troops, giving you really good rate on those discovers, and also again dragging that toolbox around. And they've got a lot of mechanically unique models and a lot of very unique combinations of models and gear, kind of linking back in with that linked special equipment. And we did also have some weaknesses that I discovered. Very weak to MSV, especially a MSV and MIM combo like on an Epsilon or on a Nice is a really big challenge for the faction to overcome. You've got a lack of long-ranged AP as well, and that non-lethal is matchup dependent, and those two sort of roll in together to each other, where the only long-ranged AP you have is on EM weapons, and again that is matchup dependent. You're overpaying for 1 wound models. This has always been the case with ISS, but that's the cost you do pay for having that very cool linked special equipment. But it does mean that sometimes you can feel pressure to put things like Quang Shi in the list, who aren't necessarily slot efficient, or it means you don't get to bring all the toys you want to the table. And last, Close Assault is very expensive. So let's look at some lessons learned. I think most ISS lists should bring a way to solve MSV arrows, whether this is disco balls, meaning you have to take either a Bayara or a Dil, or very heavy guns, where I think the Long Wang and the Cien are the only ones I'm really inclined to put in this category. Maybe a Marksman Dakini, but I found that to not be the most resilient or necessarily maneuverable. but I think you really want to take those disco balls or heavy guns, have at least one per list, just to make sure. Sending out Guangxi explosions is harder than it looks on the tin. If the Guangxi takes 2 wounds in arrow, it doesn't explode. If it takes a shock round, it doesn't explode, which means that affecting a close assault with Guangxi can be pretty difficult. So in this way, the shotgun Guangxi is actually very high value. I tested a fair bit with it before the tournament, but as my lists changed and iterated, it got phased out. But I think if I had another shot at it, I would put that shotgun Guangxi back in, see where I could move things around. The remotes as a primary defensive net seem like a very good direction. Again, you are overpaying for your 1 wound sort of meat infantry, which means they don't want to stand up and take AROs, and your heavy units don't really have much in terms of the way of ARO potential. So having those remotes and engineerable units as your defensive net seems to function quite well. The Link smoke grenade launchers are absolutely outstanding, having a lot of fun playing with those, and able to get outcomes with those in a really efficient way. And Sun Z isn't a meme. I was very wrong about Sun Z. If you watch my initial reaction video to the new ISS, I was very down on Sun Z. I wasn't really sure why you'd take him. But he was a hard unit to look at without putting him on the table. And once I put him on the table, it was like bang. I understood just how valuable he is. So if you're kind of looking at Sun Z with a strange expression on your face, give him a go. He's not just a meme. And the biggest lesson I learned from me personally is don't abandon the game plan when you panic. So everybody, I hope you enjoyed this little tournament reflection. I considered doing a full tournament report for this one, but as I was meeting lots of new people, I didn't want to be an annoying YouTube guy taking photos of the table all the time, asking them for the lists, etc. The event was really great. Really enjoyed bringing ISS, and I hope you guys enjoy the video too. Please, comment videos you'd like to see next. We've got another big tournament coming up in Australia in September, Burn City Brawl 2025. So please sign up if you haven't already, and expect some videos to do with that coming quite soon. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.